A man lies bleeding on the showroom floor of Tate Motors in Detroit, tires screeching outside as a truck peels into the night, leaving Marcus Tate, the Undercover CEO, stunned that a simple car purchase spiraled into this chaos earlier. He'd strolled in, cap low, expecting petty slights, not a brutal clash. To customers, racist jabs had lit the fuse, but the explosion was beyond words. His empire teeters now, its future a gamble. How did a test of fairness turn into a fight for survival? Hey, where are you watching from? If you stand for justice, hit like and subscribe for more wild tales like this. Marcus Tate gripped the steering wheel of his rented rust bucket sedan, squinting through the windshield as Detroit's skyline loomed. Under a punishing July sun in 20-20-5, sweat beaded on his brow, not just from the 90-degree heat baking the cracked asphalt, but from the pulse of anticipation thrumming in his chest. He wasn't the polished CEO of Tate Motors today, not the black titan who'd turned a single used car lot into a nationwide empire, with nothing but grit and a knack for outsmarting the odds. No, today he was just Marcus, a nobody in a faded gray t-shirt, scuffed sneakers, and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. His tailored suits, gold cufflinks, and custom Cadillac stayed home in the garage 30 miles away in Bloomfield Hills. This was about stripping it all away, peeling back the layers of power to see what festered beneath the shiny surface of his flagship dealership on Woodward Avenue. He'd built this company brick by brick, rising from the cracked sidewalks of Detroit's East Side, where he'd dodged gang recruiters at 12 and hauled scrap metal at 15 to feed his mom and little sister. Every dollar, every handshake, every late night poring over sales logs had been fueled by a promise his business would stand for something better, a place where trust trumped greed. But whispers had reached him lately, quiet complaints from customers and a nagging hunch that the values he'd etched into Tate Motors' foundation were eroding. Reports weren't enough anymore. He needed the raw truth, unfiltered by middlemen or polished PR. So here he was, undercover, rolling up to the glass-fronted showroom in a car that coughed smoke, ready to play the part of a broke handyman shopping for a cheap ride. He parked 2 blocks down, not wanting the staff to clock anything flashy, and stepped out into the muggy air, the faint buzz of cicadas mixing with the rumble of traffic. His sneakers crunched gravel as he crossed the lot, eyes scanning the rows of gleaming vehicles under red, white, and blue banners flapping in the breeze. The dealership pulsed with life. Salesmen in crisp polos darted between customers, their voices bright with practiced charm, while a family test drove a minivan and a guy in a pinstripe suit admired a cherry red coupe. Marcus blended in, invisible, just another face in the crowd. No one rushed to greet him. No one offered a firm handshake or a glossy brochure. Perfect. He didn't want the VIP treatment. He wanted the real deal, the kind of service Joe Schmo got when he walked through those doors with no clout and a thin wallet. His gaze landed on a beat-up blue pickup tucked near the back of the lot, its chipped paint and dented fender screaming practical over flashy at $10,000. It was the kind of ride a guy like him, well, the guy he was pretending to be, might scrape together a down payment for. He ran a hand along its hood, feeling the sun-warmed metal, and let a faint smile tug at his lips. Back in the day, he'd sold rigs like this, haggling with construction workers and single moms, listening to their stories over stale coffee in a cinderblock office. That was how he'd learned the game, how he'd built trust one deal at a time. And now, he wondered if that spirit still lived here, or if it had been polished away by quotas and commissions. He straightened up, adjusting his cap, and started toward the showroom entrance, the glass doors sliding open with a soft whoosh. Inside, the air conditioning hit him like a cold slap, the scent of new leather and tire rubber thick in the air. The place sparkled, waxed floors reflected fluorescent lights, touchscreen kiosks hummed with financing options, and a dozen cars sat on display, their curves glinting like they'd rolled straight off a magazine cover. Sales staff buzzed around, their energy trained on the big spenders. A weary guy in a polo clapped a suited customer on the back, steering him toward a black SUV with chrome rims, while a woman with a clipboard pitched a hybrid to a couple in designer sunglasses. Marcus drifted past them, unnoticed, his sneakers silent on the tiles. He caught snippets of chatter: monthly payments, extended warranties, 0% APR, but no one spared him a glance. Fine by him. He'd expected as much, maybe even hoped for it. This was the test. Would his people see past the clothes, the lack of swagger, and treat him like he mattered? So far, the answer leaned hard toward no, and it prickled under his skin. A quiet itch he couldn't scratch yet. He stopped by the blue pickup's indoor twin, a slightly cleaner model parked near a Fox brick wall with a price tag dangling from the mirror. He crouched, pretending to check the tires, letting his eyes roam the room. The staff's focus stayed locked on the flashier clients, their laughter and backslaps reserved for wallets that looked fat from a mile away. Marcus stood, brushing dust off his hands, and took a step toward the counter, ready to push this experiment further. That's when the voices hit him, low and sharp, slicing through the showroom's hum like a blade through silk. To customers, stood a dozen feet back, near a silver sedan with a sunroof, their heads bent close but their words carrying clear as day. The man was burly, mid-40s, with a thick neck and a trucker hat tilted back. His sunburned arms crossed over a faded flannel shirt. The woman beside him was weary, her blonde hair pulled tight in a ponytail, lips pursed in a smirk as she toyed with a cane. He's probably here to steal hubcaps, not buy anything, the man said, his voice a gravelly drawl, loud enough to draw a stifled chuckle from his companion. The woman's eyes flicked toward Marcus, quick and dismissive, before she leaned in closer. Yeah, bet he's just scoping the place out, looking for parts to pawn, she added, her tone dripping with a smug edge that made Marcus's stomach twist. He froze, one hand still on the pickup's door handle, the words sinking in slow and heavy. Steal hubcaps, pawn parts. He'd heard worse growing up, slurs shouted from passing cars, cops rousting him for no reason, but this was different. This was his house, his turf, the empire he'd bled for. And these two clowns were laughing like he was some petty thief crashing their party. Their chuckles grated, a sound that echoed back to every time he'd been sized up and found wanting. Every time he'd had to prove he belonged. He straightened, jaw tight, but kept his face blank, letting them dig their hole deeper. The man snorted, nudging the woman. Look at him, messing with that junker. Probably can't even spell loan, let alone get one. She giggled, a high-pitched chirp that set Marcus's teeth on edge, and tossed her ponytail. Oh, come on, he's just killing time till security boots him out. Marcus's fingers curled into his palm, nails biting skin, but he didn't turn, didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. Not yet. He'd come here to see the cracks, and damn if they weren't showing already. These weren't just idle jabs. They were a spotlight on the rot he'd feared, prejudice so casual it didn't even hide. He'd built Tate Motors to be better than this, to lift people up, not kick them down. But those laughs, those sneers, they were the first ripple, a tremor hinting at the quake to come. He took a slow breath, letting the sting settle, and started toward the counter, mind racing. He'd play this out, see how far it went. Little did he know, those two loudmouths were about to turn a quiet test into a full-on war. Marcus Tate pushed through the showroom's cool air, his sneakers squeaking faintly on the waxed tiles as he approached the sales counter, the beat-up blue pickup's keys dangling in his mind like a prize he'd already claimed. The hum of the dealership buzzed around him, phones chirping, printers whirring, and salesmen tossing jargon at richer-looking folks like candy at a parade. He'd come to test his empire's heart, to see if Tate Motors still beat with the fairness he'd forged into it 20 years back when he'd been a skinny kid with nothing but a wrench and a dream. Now, under that faded cap, he was a ghost in his own house, and the two loudmouths behind him had already drawn first blood with their hubcap-stealing cracks. Could his staff do better, or were they part of the rot? He reached the counter, a sleek slab of black granite manned by a kid who couldn't be more than 22. All gelled hair and a polo stretched tight over bony shoulders, the name tag read Kyle, and his eyes flicked up from a tablet, sizing Marcus up in a heartbeat, before settling into a smirk that said everything without a word. Marcus leaned in, keeping his voice steady, casual, like he was asking about the weather. Hey, I'm here for that blue pickup out back, the $10,000 one. What's the next step? Kyle's smirk widened, a flash of teeth that didn't reach his eyes, and he tapped the tablet like it was a chore. You sure you can swing that? We don't do handouts here, my man. The my man landed like a jab, dripping with a condescension Marcus hadn't heard since he'd hawked cars on lots smaller than this. He swallowed the heat rising in his throat, keeping his face a mask of calm. This was the game. Play the part. See how deep the cracks ran. He slid a wad of cash from his pocket, 5 crisp hundreds, folded tight and dropped it on the counter. With a soft thud, down payments covered. Let's get this moving. Kyle's smirk faltered, his fingers hesitating over the bills like he couldn't believe they were real. Marcus caught the flicker of surprise, the kid's brain scrambling to rewrite the story he'd already told himself about the guy in the ratty t-shirt. Around them, the showroom kept spinning, but Marcus's ears tuned sharp to the voices creeping up again from behind. Those same customers who'd pegged him for a thief. The burly man's gravelly tone cut through the chatter, louder now, like he wanted an audience. Cash, probably drug money, right? No way that guy's legit. The woman's chirpy laugh followed, a sound like nails on glass, and she tossed in her own venom. Oh, for sure. Bet he's got a stash in that junker he crawled out of. Marcus's spine stiffened, his pulse kicking up a notch, but he kept his eyes locked on Kyle, watching the kid's reaction. Would he call it out? Step up? Nope. Kyle's lips twitched, a half-stifled chuckle slipping out as he scooped up the cash and turned to a stack of forms. Gotta run this through, you know, standard stuff, he said, his tone flat, but his amusement plain as day. Marcus nodded, slow and deliberate, letting the sting settle. Drug money, a stash, these weren't just petty digs anymore. They were a full-on assault, painting him as some lowlife who didn't belong in their shiny world. He'd faced this garbage before, cops pulling him over for driving too nice a car in his teens, landlords slamming doors when he'd shown up to rent in his 20s, but hearing it here, in the empire he'd built to rise above that, hit different. It was personal now, a slap to everything he'd fought for. He leaned on the counter, forcing his voice to stay even. How long's this gonna take? Kyle shrugged, already punching numbers into the tablet, not bothering to look up. Couple minutes, maybe more. We gotta check you out. Make sure everything's clean. Policy for, certain folks. That last bit hung in the air, heavy with meaning, and Marcus's fingers curled into his palm, nails digging crescent moons into his skin. Certain folks. He knew exactly what that meant. And it wasn't about the cash, it was the same old song. Black guy with money, must be dirty. He'd proven them wrong 1,000 times, built a fortune, hired hundreds, paid taxes that funded their roads, and still, here he was, getting the side-eye from a punk who wouldn't last a day in the life Marcus had lived. The two customers kept at it, their voices rising like they were putting on a show. But he's sweating bullets now, the man said, snorting. Watch him bolt when they pull his record. The woman giggled again, her ponytail bouncing as she nodded. Yeah, $5 says he's out of here before the ink dries. Marcus's chest tightened, a storm brewing behind his ribs, but he held it in, letting the cash do the talking. Kyle finished tapping, slid the bills into a drawer, and grabbed a clipboard, his smirk back in full force. All right, we'll process this, but it's gonna be a sec. Background checks take longer for, some people. He lingered on some people, eyes darting to Marcus's worn sneakers, then away. Marcus caught the glance, the judgment, and felt a flicker of triumph as he stood taller. He'd paid up, shut their mouths with hard-earned green $500, said he wasn't the broke loser they'd pegged him for. He'd won this round, right? The deal was moving. The truck was his. He let a small grin tug at his lips, thinking he'd turned their assumptions upside down. But then Kyle paused, clipboard in hand, and muttered under his breath, just loud enough to carry. Gotta double-check this cash, too. Can't be too careful with certain types. Marcus's grin froze, his gut twisting as the words sank in. Double-check the cash, certain types. This wasn't policy. This was prejudice, plain and ugly, baked into the kid's bones. Kyle shuffled off to a back office, leaving Marcus stranded at the counter, the clipboard untouched, the deal stalled. The customers behind him erupted, the man's guffaw booming. Across the room, "Told you. He's toast. They're onto him now." The woman clapped her hands, delighted. "Oh, this is gold. He's stuck, and he knows it." Marcus stood there, cash gone. Keys nowhere in sight, the victory he'd tasted souring fast. He'd thought he'd beaten their game. Flipped the script with a stack of bills. But the system, or at least this smug kid, wasn't letting him off that easy. The delay wasn't random. It was a power play, a way to keep him in his place. And those two clowns were eating it up. His hands flexed, itching to do something, call Kyle out. Storm the office, anything, but he held back, mind racing. This was bigger than a slow transaction. It was a crack splitting wider, a glimpse of the rot he'd come to find. What would he do with it? Hey, drop a comment with number 1 if you'd call out that punk Kyle right then and there, or number 2 if you think Marcus should play it cool a bit longer. Smash that like button if you're raging at this injustice already. And subscribe so you don't miss how this explodes next. Ever dealt with a smirk like Kyle's? Tell me below. So, what's Marcus gonna do when those customers push him one step too far? Marcus Tate stood at the sales counter, the cool granite under his palms doing nothing to chill the fire licking up his spine. The air in Tate Motors' Detroit showroom felt thick, heavy with the echoes of Kyle's muttered certain types, and the cash he'd shuffled off to double-check, leaving Marcus high and dry. His down payment $500, hard-earned from a life of hustle, sat somewhere in the back, a hostage to the kid's smug delay, while the two customers behind him kept piling on the venom. Their voices had sharpened, cutting through the dealership's hum like rusty razors, each word a fresh jab at the dignity he'd spent decades building. The burly man's gravelly snort rang out again, loud enough to turn heads. "Look at him, sweating it out. Told you he's toast now." The woman's chirpy giggle followed, her ponytail swishing as she clapped back. "Yeah, he's stuck like a rat in a trap. Should have known better than to try this place." Marcus's fingers tightened, knuckles whitening against the counter's edge, his pulse thudding in his ears. Drug money, stealing hubcaps, certain types. The insults stacked up, a tower of garbage he'd climbed over 1,000 times before on street corners, in boardrooms, everywhere he'd dared to rise. But here, in the empire he'd carved from nothing, where every bolt and bumper carried his name, this wasn't just personal. It was a betrayal of everything he'd fought to create. He'd come undercover to test his company's soul, to see if fairness still lived in its bones, and so far, it was failing hard. Kyle's smirk, the customers' sneers, they were cracks splitting wider, and Marcus was done letting them widen in silence. He'd paid cash, proved he wasn't the broke nobody they'd pegged him for, and still they kept pushing. Enough was enough. He turned slow, deliberate, his sneakers pivoting on the tiles until he faced the two loudmouths a dozen feet away. The burly man stood broad and tall, his trucker hat cocked back, sunburned arms flexing as he crossed them over his flannel chest. The woman beside him froze mid-laugh, her cane dangling limp in her hand, blonde ponytail stilled as Marcus's. Eyes locked onto hers. The showroom's chatter dulled, a few heads swiveling their way, sensing the shift in the air. Marcus took a step forward, his voice dropping low, a steel thread running through it that could have cut glass. "You think you know me? Keep talking. I dare you." The words hung there, sharp and heavy, a challenge tossed like a live wire into the space between them. The man blinked, caught off guard, his thick neck flushing red as he scrambled for a foothold. "Hey, it's just a joke. Man, chill out," he muttered, his gravelly drawl losing its edge, hands uncrossing to wave off the tension. The woman jumped in, her voice pitching high and shaky. "Yeah, we didn't mean nothing. Just messing around." Her smirk faltered, replaced by a twitchy half grin, her fingers fumbling with the cane like it might save her. Marcus didn't budge, his gaze pinning them both, dark and unflinching. He took another step, closing the gap to 8 feet, his shadow stretching across the tiles. "A joke? Funny how those always land on someone else. You to make a habit of this, or am I just lucky today?" His tone stayed steady, but the weight behind it pressed down, a quiet fury that didn't need volume to hit home. The man's flush deepened, his jaw working like he wanted to snap back, but couldn't find the spine. "Look, buddy, no harm done, all right. You're taking it all wrong," he grumbled, eyes darting to the side, searching for an out. The woman nodded fast, her ponytail bobbing again. "Seriously, it's not a big deal. Let's drop it." Marcus held their stares a beat longer, letting the silence stretch. Feeling the room tilt toward him, a couple of salesmen paused mid-pitch, their clipboards lowering as they clocked the standoff. A woman browsing a sedan nearby turned, her brow creasing, while a guy in a polo near the coffee machine whispered something to his buddy. Marcus saw it all, felt the shift, and a spark of triumph flared in his chest. He'd called them out, stripped their smug little game bare, and they were squirming. This was his house, his rules, even if they didn't know it yet. He gave a slow nod, like he was granting them mercy, and turned back to the counter, shoulders squared. "Next time, pick your targets better," he tossed over his shoulder, voice low but carrying clear. The man muttered something under his breath, too soft to catch, and the woman huffed, but they didn't push back. Marcus felt their eyes boring into his back as he leaned on the counter again. The tension still crackling, but the power flipped. He'd shut them down, reclaimed the space they'd tried to steal from him, and it felt damn good. Kyle hustled out from the back office then, clipboard in hand, his smirk gone, replaced by a nervous twitch. "Paperwork's ready, sir," he said, voice cracking a little as he slid the forms across. Marcus caught the "sir," a stark jump from "my man," and his grin crept wider. The kid had seen the showdown, felt the heat, and now he was scrambling to catch up. Marcus signed the sheets quick, his pen scratching loud in the suddenly quieter room, and Kyle handed over the keys with a fumble, muttering, "Truck's yours, all set." Marcus palmed the keys, the cold metal a solid win in his grip, and turned toward the exit. Head high, he'd walked in invisible, taken their crap, and come out on top, or so he thought. The burly man and woman had slunk off toward a silver sedan, their heads bent close, voices hushed now, but Marcus didn't clock the shift. He was too busy savoring the moment. The way he'd flipped their assumptions and made them eat their words. His ribs loosened, the storm in his chest easing as he crossed the showroom, the glass doors sliding open ahead. He'd come to see the truth, and he'd faced it head on, turned it around with nothing but a stare and a few sharp lines. This was why he'd built Tate Motors, to prove guys like him could rise, could win, no matter what the world threw. He stepped into the lot, the July heat slamming back, and headed for the blue pickup, keys jingling in his hand. Victory tasted sweet, a rare sip after the bitter gall of their sneers and Kyle's stall. He figured he'd drive off, report this, mess to his execs, maybe shake up the training manuals. The cracks were there, sure, but he'd patch this one, right? Wrong. Out in the lot, the burly man lingered by a black SUV parked near the exit, his sunburned face twisted into something harder than embarrassment. He spat a wad of tobacco onto the asphalt, the dark glob landing inches from Marcus's path, and pulled out his phone, thumb jabbing the screen. "Yeah, it's Ray," he growled into it, voice low but carrying on the still air. "We've got a problem. Some punk just made a scene, thinks he's hot stuff, need this handled." His eyes tracked Marcus, narrow and cold, as he climbed into the truck. Marcus didn't hear the call, didn't see the glare. He cranked the engine, the rumble vibrating through his bones, and pulled out, tires crunching gravel, oblivious to the storm brewing behind him. Ray Carter, city councilman and local kingpin of petty grudges, wasn't done. Marcus had won the skirmish, humiliated him in front of a crowd, and Ray didn't lose easy. The call ended with a grunt, Ray's lips curling as he pocketed the phone and climbed into his SUV. Marcus thought he'd turned the tide, but the real wave was coming, and it had hit harder than he could ever guess. Marcus Tate eased the blue pickup out of Tate Motors' lot, the engine's low growl vibrating through the worn seats. As Detroit's July heat pressed against the cracked windows, the keys jangled in his hand moments ago, a hard-won prize after staring down those two loudmouths and forcing Kyle to eat his smirk. His chest still buzzed with the thrill of it turning their sneers into stammers. Flipping the script with a few sharp words and a stack of cash, he'd walked into his own dealership, a ghost, a black man in faded clothes testing the soul of his empire, and walked out with a win, or so he thought. The sun dipped low, painting the Woodward Avenue skyline in streaks of orange and gold, and Marcus let his shoulders loosen, the tension from the showroom melting into the hum of the road. He'd seen the crack skiles bias, the customers, venom, but he'd patched this one, proved he could still hold his ground. The truck's AC sputtered, barely pushing cool air, but he didn't care. This was real, raw, a taste of the life he'd left behind when he'd traded greasy overalls for boardroom chairs. He turned left onto a side street, aiming for a gas station a mile off to fill up before heading home, the day's lessons already spinning in his head. Training overhaul, maybe a surprise audit, something to root out the rot he'd felt under his own roof. He didn't see the shadows moving in the lot's far corner, didn't hear the crunch of boots on gravel as he pulled away. 3 figures peeled out from behind a row of parked cars, their faces masked in black bandanas, eyes glinting under the dimming light. They moved fast, purposeful, cutting across the asphalt like wolves on a scent. Marcus hit a red light 2 blocks down, the intersection quiet except for a kid on a bike weaving through traffic. He tapped the wheel, mind still on the showroom, when the first blow landed, a fist slamming the driver's side window, spiderwebbing the glass an inch from his face. He jerked back, heart slamming into his ribs as 3 masked men swarmed. The truck, the second guy, stocky with a shaved head showing under his mask, yanked the door open, meaty hands clawing at Marcus's arm. "Out, now, you piece of trash," he snarled, voice thick with hate. Marcus twisted, adrenaline flooding his veins, and shoved back hard, catching the guy's chest with his elbow. "What the hell?" he roared, but the words drowned under a flood of slurs, pouring from the third thug, a weary bastard wielding a crowbar. "Stay in your lane, boy, this ain't your place." The crowbar swung, smashing into Marcus's ribs with a sickening crack, pain exploding white-hot through his side. He gasped, doubling over, but instinct kicked in, years of scrapping on. Detroit's East Side hadn't left him soft. He lunged, slamming his fist into the weary guy's jaw, feeling bone give under his knuckles, and the thug staggered back, spitting blood. The stocky one grabbed Marcus's collar, hauling him half out of the truck, asphalt scraping his knees as he hit the ground. "You think you're tough, huh? Messing with the wrong people," he barked, slamming a boot into Marcus's thigh. The first guy, tall and lean with a scar peeking from his mask, circled around, fists clenched. "Ray said make it hurt, let's do this right." Marcus's mind raced, the name slicing through the fog of pain. Ray, the burly loudmouth from the showroom, the one who'd spat tobacco and made that call. This wasn't random, this was payback. A grudge turned bloody. He rolled, dodging another crowbar swing that dented the truck's door, and scrambled to his feet. Chest heaving, the lean one lunged, tackling him against the fender, pinning his arms as the stocky thug landed a gut punch that knocked the wind clean out of him. "You don't belong here, filth," the stocky one spat, fist cocked for another blow. Marcus's vision blurred, ribs screaming, but he wasn't done. He'd fought worse odds, gangbangers with knives, cops with grudges, and he'd be damned if these punks took him down in his own city. He drove his knee up, catching the lean guy square in the groin, and the thug crumpled with a wheeze, grip loosening. Marcus broke free, stumbling back, and snatched the crowbar from the ground where it had fallen. He swung wild, cracking the stocky one's shoulder, the guy howling as he dropped. The weary thug charged, eyes blazing, but Marcus sidestepped, smashing the crowbar into his knee, sending him sprawling with a shriek. Blood dripped from Marcus's split lip, staining his t-shirt, and his ribs throbbed like a drumbeat, but he stood tall, crowbar trembling in his grip. The lean one staggered up, clutching himself, and glared through the mask. "This ain't over, you hear me?" he hissed, backing off as the others groaned on the pavement. Marcus panted, every breath a knife in his side, and tossed the crowbar into the truck bed with a clang. "Tell Ray he picked the wrong fight," he growled, voice ragged but iron hard. He climbed in, slamming the door, and gunned the engine, tires squealing as he peeled out, leaving the trio in the dust. The light turned green, the kid on the bike gaping from the curb, but Marcus didn't stop. didn't look back. Blood smeared the wheel, his hands shaking as he gripped it. Weaving through traffic toward the gas station, his mind spun, piecing it together. Ray Carter, that flannel-wearing jackass, hadn't just sulked off after the showdown. He'd called in muscle, turned a petty spat into a street brawl. And those slurs weren't random. They were a message. Marcus's knuckles whitened, anger surging past the pain. He'd survived, fought them off, kept his truck and his pride. He'd taken worse beatings as a kid, walked away from uglier nights, and he'd come out swinging. This time, too, the gas station loomed ahead, neon flickering against the dusk, and he pulled in, cutting the engine. He leaned back, wincing as his ribs protested, and fished a rag from the glove box to wipe his face. 3 against 1, and he'd sent them limping. Damn right he'd won. He'd report this, get security footage from the lot, nail Ray for this crap. The adrenaline ebbed, leaving a dull ache and a flicker of relief. He'd dodged the worst, kept his head up. This was over, wasn't it? He didn't hear the phone buzzing in the lean thug's pocket as he pulled away. Didn't catch the voice on the other end when the guy finally answered, mask shoved up, blood streaking his chin. Yeah, Ray, we roughed him up good. The thug muttered, spitting into the dirt. Broke a few ribs, but he got away. Fought like a damn animal. A pause, then Ray's growl crackled through, low and venomous. This ain't the end. He thinks he's tough. I'll show him tough. Get ready for round 2. The thug nodded, pocketing the phone as his buddies groaned upright. The promise hanging thick in the humid air. Marcus, nursing his wounds under the gas station's harsh lights, checked his swollen lip in the side mirror, oblivious to the storm reloading behind him. He'd survived the ambush, sure, but Ray Carter wasn't licking wounds, he was sharpening claws, and the next hit would make this brawl look like a warm-up. Marcus Tate limped the blue pickup back toward Tate Motors, the gas station's neon fading in the rearview. As Detroit's dusk swallowed the last streaks of daylight, blood crusted his lip, staining the rag he'd pressed to his face, and every breath stabbed his cracked ribs like a hot poker. The ambush had hit hard. 3 masked thugs, fists and crowbars, slurs raining down with every blow, but he'd fought them off, left them sprawled on the asphalt, and kept his truck. His knuckles throbbed from smashing the weary one's jaw. His thigh burned where a boot had landed, but he'd won, damn it. He'd survived, turned their hate into a pile of groans, and that was something. The dealership loomed ahead, its glass facade glinting under floodlights, a beacon of his empire now tinged with a bitter edge. He'd come undercover to test its soul, to see if fairness still pulsed through its veins, and the answer was a jagged no. Kyle's smirk, the customer's sneers, and now this a beatdown ordered by that flannel-clad loudmouth, Ray, who'd spat tobacco and made a call Marcus hadn't heard. The pieces clicked as he drove, pain sharpening his focus. This wasn't random, it was retaliation. A grudge turned bloody after he'd shut Ray down in the showroom. He pulled into the lot, tires crunching gravel, and parked near the entrance. Wincing as he climbed out, his t-shirt clung to his sweat-soaked back, blood spotting the gray fabric, and his cap sat crooked from the scuffle. He needed answers, security, footage, names, something to nail Ray, and he wasn't leaving without them. The glass doors slid open, cool air hitting his bruised face as he staggered in, one hand braced on his ribs. The showroom buzzed softer now, evening thinning the crowd, but heads turned fast. A salesman froze mid-pitch, clipboard slipping in his grip, while a woman near a hatchback gasped. Her purse clutched tight. Marcus ignored them, hobbling toward the counter where Kyle had stalled him hours ago, his jaw set despite the ache. He wasn't here to buy now, he was here to demand. "Get me the manager," he barked, voice rough but loud, cutting through the hum. Kyle popped up from behind the counter, gelled hair still perfect, but his smirk vanished when he saw Marcus bloodied, battered, and radiating fury. What happened to you?" the kid stammered, eyes wide, stepping back like Marcus might swing. "Just get the damn manager, now," Marcus snapped, slamming his palm on the granite, the sound echoing sharp. Kyle bolted, disappearing into the back, and Marcus leaned hard on the counter, sucking air through gritted teeth. The room tilted toward him, whispers rippling as staff and customers clocked the scene. Then a voice cut through. soft but piercing. From the far end of the showroom, Mr. Tate, Marcus's head snapped up, pain forgotten for a split second, and he locked eyes with Miss Clara, a gray-haired cashier who'd been with him since the early days. She stood by a payment kiosk, her apron wrinkled from a long shift, her brown eyes widening behind thick glasses. She shuffled forward, hands trembling, and repeated it louder. "Mr. Tate, is that you?" The air sucked out of the room, every head swiveling between her and the bloodied man at the counter. Marcus froze, the undercover game blown wide open. He'd meant to keep it quiet, slip in and out as a nobody, but Clara's voice shattered that plan. She'd clocked him through the bruises, the cap, the messed 20 years of loyalty cutting through his disguise like a blade. Cal stumbled back out, trailed by a balding manager in a cheap suit. But Clara reached Marcus first, her hands hovering like she wanted to help but didn't know where to start. "Lord, what happened? You're hurt bad," she said, voice cracking. Marcus waved her off, grimacing. "I'm fine, Clara. Just need to talk to these folks." But the damage was done. The manager, a sweaty guy named Paul, blinked at him, then at Clara, gears grinding slow. "Wait, Tate, as in Marcus Tate, the CEO?" His voice pitched high, panic creeping in, and the showroom erupted gasps, murmurs. A salesman dropping his coffee cup with a splash. Marcus straightened, ribs screaming, and yanked off his cap, tossing it on the counter. "Yeah, that's me. Been here all day, seeing how you treat people, and I've got a hell of a story to tell." The staff scrambled, Kyle's face draining. White, Paul's hands flapping as he tried to sputter an excuse. "Sir, we had no idea, I swear. We'd have..." Marcus cut him off, voice low and lethal. "Save it. I didn't come for apologies. I came for the truth, and I got it. Now I want security footage from the lot. 2 hours back, 3 punks jumped me, and I'm betting you'll see why." Paul nodded fast, barking at Kyle to pull the tapes. While Clara hovered, muttering prayers under her breath, Marcus turned to the staff clustering near the coffee machine, their polos wrinkled from a long day, and let his fury loose. "I built this place on respect. Every customer, every deal, doesn't matter who they are. But today, I got ignored, stalled, laughed at. Then I got this." He yanked up his shirt, showing the purple welts blooming across his ribs, blood streaking the skin. The room went dead quiet, a salesman wincing, another looking away. "This ain't what Tate Motors stands for. You're all on notice, shape up, or you're out." His words landed like punches, the staff shrinking under the weight, and Marcus felt a surge anger. Yes, but power, too. He'd blown his cover, sure, but he'd taken control. Flipped the chaos into a reckoning. Paul returned, stammering about, the footage being cued, and Marcus nodded, leaning on Clara for support as she guided him to a chair. "You shouldn't be standing, Mr. Tate." She fussed, and he let her fuss, the adrenaline fading into a dull roar of pain. He'd exposed the rot, put the fear of God into them, and now he'd get Ray on tape. This was a win, right? He'd turned the ambush into leverage, his identity a weapon to clean house. He sank into the chair, ribs throbbing, thinking he'd wrestled the day back from the brink. But outside, near the lot's edge, Ray Carter lingered in his black SUV, flannel sleeves rolled up, tobacco staining his teeth as he watched the glass doors. He'd seen Marcus limpin', heard the whispers filtering out. "CEO, undercover, attacked." His thick fingers drummed the wheel, a smirk curling his lips. So the punk was big time, huh? Didn't matter. Ray wasn't some small fry loudmouth. He was a city councilman with juice, a man who bent cops and courts to his whims. Marcus had humiliated him, sure, turned his jabs into a public flop. But this was war now. He pulled out his phone, thumb jabbing the screen, and growled into it. "Yeah, it's Ray, that guy from the showroom. He's the damn CEO. Thinks he's untouchable. Time to teach this uppity fool a lesson he won't forget." He hung up, eyes glinting cold as he peeled out, tires kicking dust. Marcus, inside, sipped water Clara brought him, oblivious to the call. Thinking his reveal had tipped the scales, Ray wasn't sulking, he was plotting. And the next strike would hit harder than fists or crowbars. Hey, comment number 1. If you think Marcus should have stayed undercover longer, Or number 2, if blowing his cover was the right move to shake things up. Hit that like button if you're pumped he's fighting back, and subscribe to catch every twist coming his way. Ever had to call out a room like that? Tell me below. So, what's Ray got up his sleeve to make Marcus regret this day? Marcus Tate slumped in the dealership chair, the ice-packed Clara pressed to his swollen lip, a cold shock against the heat pulsing through his battered body. His ribs ached with every shallow breath, purple welts blooming under his torn t-shirt from the ambush that had nearly flattened him 2 hours ago. The showroom's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the staff scurrying to pull security footage. He'd demanded after blowing his cover. He'd limped back to Tate Motors, a wreck, bloodied, bruised, and pissed, only to have Miss Clara spot him as the CEO, turning his quiet test into a loud reckoning. He'd faced down the staff, laid bare the rot he'd found, and felt the scales tip back his way. Kyle's nervous fumbles, Paul's sweaty apologies, it was a start. A crack he could hammer into real change. The footage would nail Ray Carter, that flannel-clad councilman who'd sent those thugs, and Marcus could taste the justice coming. He shifted, wincing as his ribs protested, and sipped the water Clara had shoved into his hand, her worried clucks fading into the background. He'd survived the brawl, turned the chaos into control, and now he'd root out Ray's poison. Or so he thought. Outside, Detroit's night thickened, the city's pulse thumping beyond the glass walls, oblivious to the storm brewing beyond Marcus's sight. Ray Carter hadn't driven far after his call from the lot. He'd parked his black SUV in a diner, lot 3 miles off, tobacco-stained fingers scrolling his phone, a smirk splitting his sunburned face. The ambush hadn't finished. Marcus, damn fool, fought like a cornered dog, but Ray wasn't sweating it. He'd gotten word from his boys, the CEO reveal, the staff scrambling. Marcus playing king in his own castle. Big shot or not, Ray didn't bend for nobody, especially not some punk who'd made him look small in front of a crowd. He'd been a councilman 10 years, twisting favors and burying enemies, and this was personal now. He opened a video file one of his goons had sent, grainy cell footage from the showroom. Marcus squaring up to him and his gal, voice low and lethal. "You think you know me? Keep talking. I dare you." Ray's flush had burned hot then, and it burned hotter now, watching it loop. He handed the clip to a greasy-haired tech buddy over coffee, spitting orders. "Cut it up. Make him look bad. I want this city chewing him up by morning." The tech delivered fast, and by midnight, Ray hit send, blasting the doctored video across Detroit's social feeds. The clip hit like a Molotov, 40 seconds of Marcus looming, voice clipped to sound like a threat. "Keep talking. I dare you." Spliced with Ray's stammered "just a joke" cut to seem meek, innocent. No context, no bruises, just a black CEO assaulting a white customer. Edited to paint him as a thug in a cap. By sunrise, Detroit's news stations had it on loop. CEO attacks patrons at Tate Motors. And the city erupted. Marcus woke to his phone buzzing off the nightstand in his Bloomfield Hills condo. 30 missed calls from his PR team, his execs, his sister. He'd crashed hard after the dealership, ribs taped by a late-night doc, figuring he'd deal with Ray later. Now, bleary-eyed, he flicked on the TV, and his own face glared back, twisted into a snarl on Channel 7. Marcus Tate, head of Tate Motors, caught intimidating customers in a shocking display, the anchor chirped. The video rolling again. His gut dropped, cold sweat prickling his neck. This wasn't security footage, this was a hit job. And he knew who'd swung the axe. Protests flared outside Tate Motors by 9, a mob of 50, then 100, waving signs, "Boycott Tate." No thugs in charge, their chants echoing off the glass. Ray's cronies stirred the pot, bullhorns blaring. "He doesn't belong here. Run him out." Marcus watched from his condo, jaw tight, as the feed cut to a pundit sneering, "Self-made, millionaire or not, this is what happens when you let certain people climb to high." Certain people. The same crap Kyle had pulled, the same venom from Ray's gal, now amplified across a city he'd poured his soul into. He called his PR chief, Lena, voice hoarse. "Get me a press conference noon. I'm not letting this lie stand." By 11, he was suited up, Navy jacket, no tie, ribs screaming under the tape and rolling into Tate Motors' lot. Protesters parting slow as his truck growled through. Cameras swarmed, Mick shoving in his face, but he pushed past, head high, and took the podium Paul had scrambled to set up inside. The staff flanked him. Clara's worried eyes locked on his as he faced the lenses. "Yesterday, I went undercover to see how my company treats people," he started, voice steady. "Despite the ache, I got ignored, stalled, mocked. Then I got jumped 3 men. Sent because I stood up to prejudice in this very room." He yanked up his jacket, showing the bruises, the blood-streaked tape, and the crowd hushed, cameras clicking wild. "This video, it's a fake. A smear by a coward who can't face me straight. I built Tate Motors on respect, and I'll fight to keep it that way." He dropped names: Ray Carter, councilman with a grudge, and played the real security clip. Shaky but clear, him limping in, demanding answers, no threats, just truth. The tide turned fast. Reporters scribbled, protesters faltered, and social feeds flipped #justice for Tate trending by 2. Marcus exhaled, ribs throbbing, as Lena clapped his shoulder. "You nailed it, boss. They're eating Ray alive online." He nodded, a faint grin breaking through the pain. He'd flipped the script again, turned Ray's lie into a boomerang, and Detroit was waking up. The protesters thinned, some tossing signs in the trash, and Marcus sank into a chair, thinking he'd dodged the bullet. He'd exposed Ray, won the crowd, kept his empire's name alive. This was it. He'd outsmarted the bastard, right? Wrong. Ray wasn't at the diner now. He sat in a dim downtown bar, 3 blocks from City Hall, nursing a whiskey as the press conference streamed on a muted TV. His thick fingers crushed a napkin, smirk gone, replaced by a snarl. Marcus had turned it around, made him a punching bag online, but Ray didn't fold. He'd lost the first round in the showroom, botched the ambush, and now this. But he had deeper pockets, darker moves. He slid a 50 to a grizzled cop nursing a beer beside him, voice low. "Plant some dope in his office, top drawer. Enough to lock him up good. Let's see him talk his way out of that." The cop pocketed the bill, nodding slow, and Ray leaned back, eyes glinting. Marcus thought he'd won the city's heart, but Ray was aiming for his throat. Back at Tate Motors, Marcus watched the last reporters peel out, Clara fussing with a fresh ice pack as he rubbed his neck. The press conference had worked calls flooded in, customers pledging support, his team rallying. He'd beaten Ray's smear, turned the tide with truth and bruises, and now he could breathe, plan the next step. He didn't see the cop slipping into the lot, didn't hear the barstool creak as Ray stood, muttering. Let's see him dodge this. The wind felt solid, the ground steady under Marcus's feet. But Ray's next swing was already in motion, and it had hit harder than anything yet. Marcus Tate leaned back in the dealership chair. The ice pack Clara had swapped out, numbing his swollen lip, as the last echoes of the press conference faded from Tate Motors' showroom. His navy jacket hung loose over taped ribs, the bruises throbbing less now under the adrenaline of flipping Ray Carter's smear campaign. Detroit's airwaves still buzzed with #justice for Tate, customers clogging the lines with support, and the staff, Paul, Kyle, even skeptical salesmen rallied behind him, their polos crisp as they fielded calls. He'd walked in undercover yesterday, a ghost in a faded t-shirt testing his empire's soul, and walked out battered but victorious, turning Ray's doctored video into a public flop. The security clip he'd played him limping in, bloodied but unbowed, had shut down the CEO attacks patron's lie, and Ray's name was mud online. Marcus rubbed his neck, a faint grin tugging his split lip, thinking he'd wrestled the day back from the brink. The councilman's ambush had cracked his ribs. The smear had torched his rep, but he'd fought through. Press conference nailed, truth out, empire holding. He nodded to Clara as she bustled off, her apron flapping, and stood slow, testing his legs. Time to head home, crash, let Lena and the execs handle the fallout. He'd won this round, right? The showroom's glass walls reflected the dusk settling over Detroit, the lot quiet now, protesters gone, signs littering the curb like fallen leaves. He grabbed his cap, ribs twinging, and started for the exit. Keys to the blue pickup jangling in his pocket, That's when the doors burst open. A blast of humid air rushing in with four cops in stiff blue uniforms, badges glinting under the fluorescence. Their boots stomped the tiles, hands on holsters, eyes locked on Marcus like hawks on a mouse. The lead cop, a squat guy with a buzz cut and a jaw like concrete, barked, "Marcus Tate, you're under arrest. Hands where we can see 'em." The room froze. Paul dropped a pen. Kyle gaped. A salesman mid-call choked on his pitch. Marcus's gut plummeted, his cap slipping from his fingers to the floor. "What the hell for?" he snapped, voice rough, stepping back as the cops fanned out. Buzz Cut smirked, pulling cuffs from his belt. "Possession with intent to distribute. Found a stash in your office, top drawer. You're done, hotshot." Marcus's mind raced, ribs forgotten as outrage flared. "Stash? I don't touch that. Crap, this is a setup." But the cops didn't flinch, closing in, and Clara rushed forward, her voice shrill. "You can't do this. He's hurt. He's the boss." Buzz Cut shoved past her, grabbing Marcus's arm, twisting it hard. Pain shot through his shoulder, his ribs screaming as the cuffs clicked tight, cold metal biting his wrists. The showroom erupted, staff shouting, a customer filming on her phone, Paul stammering, "Wait, there's a mistake." But the cops hauled Marcus toward the doors, boots thudding. He twisted, locking eyes with Clara. "Call Lena, now," he yelled, voice cutting through the chaos as they dragged him out. Outside, the lot swarmed with flashing lights, 2 cruisers parked crooked, a dozen gawkers snapping pics. Marcus caught a glimpse through the crowd. Ray Carter, leaning on, his black SUV 50 yards off, flannel sleeves rolled up, a grin splitting his sunburned face. The bastard waved, slow and mocking, as the cops shoved Marcus into a cruiser's backseat. The door slamming with a clang, the ride downtown blurred, sirens wailing, Buzz Cut's radio crackling, Marcus's ribs jolting with every bump. His office, drugs, this was Ray's doing. No doubt the councilman's juice bending the law into a club to smash him with. He'd seen crooked cops before, growing up on Detroit's east side. But this was next level. A frame up stitched tight. The station loomed, a gray slab of concrete, and they yanked him out, marching him through a steel door into a holding cell. The clang of bars echoed as Buzz Cut tossed him in, smirking. "Big man now, huh? Should have stayed quiet." Marcus glared, pacing the 6x8 cage, concrete cold under his sneakers, his phone, keys, wallet gone, confiscated, and his ribs throbbed, blood crusting his shirt. He'd beaten the ambush, the smear, but this was the system turning on him. Ray's claws sunk deep into the city's guts. Hours crawled to 3, his mind spinning plans, fury boiling. Then a sharp rap on the bars, and Lena burst in, his PR chief turned lifeline. Her heels clicking fast, a weary lawyer named Greg trailing her. "Marcus, thank God," she said, voice tight. Clara called, "We've been tearing the city apart." Greg, all sharp eyes and sharper suit, shoved papers at the guard. "Bail set, evidence is shaky planted, obviously. We've got this." Marcus gripped the bars, hope flickering. "Get me out." Then we hit back hard. Greg nodded, flipping through files. "Security cams in your office show nothing. Till an hour ago someone slipped in during the press chaos. We'll prove it." The guard grumbled, unlocking the cell, and Marcus stepped free, cuffs off, ribs howling as he straightened. Lena steadied him, her grip firm. "You're a damn tank, boss." Ray's desperate, "This won't stick." By midnight, he was out, bail posted, breathing free air outside the station. Greg's car idling nearby. The lawyer laid it out. Cops found 10 ounces of coke in his drawer, enough to lock him up for years. But the timing stank, and Greg had a judge on speed dial. Marcus climbed into the back seat, exhaling hard. Ray's got pull, but we've got truth. "Let's bury him." Lena grinned, fierce. "Press is already sniffing. CEO framed is the new headline. We'll sue the department, too." Marcus nodded, a spark reigniting. He dodged the cage, turned the arrest into a counterpunch. Ray thought he'd cornered him, but Greg's evidence and Lena's spin were cracking the frame wide open. He leaned back, ribs pulsing, thinking he'd outsmarted the bastard again. The law had turned enemy, sure, but he'd slipped its grip, kept his empire in play. He pictured Ray squirming, his cop buddy sweating, and let a grim smile split his face. This was over. He'd fight in court, win the city back, right? Wrong. Ray wasn't in that bar now. He sat in a shadowed warehouse off Jefferson Avenue. A gang leader named Tito sprawled across from him, gold chains glinting under a bare bulb. The councilman slid a wad of cash across the table. Voice a low growl. He's out already, huh? Fine. Burn his dealership, make it look like he did it. Arson rap'll stick better than dope. Tito pocketed the bills, grinning wide. Say when, boss. Pussy'll be ash by dawn. Ray stood, spitting tobacco on the floor, eyes cold as steel. Now, let's see him wiggle out of this. Back at the station, Marcus climbed into Greg's car, the engine purring as they pulled away, his mind on lawsuits and headlines. He didn't see the smoke curling on the horizon, didn't hear the warehouse door slam as Tito's crew rolled out, gas cans clanking in their van. The arrest had been a gut punch, but he'd slipped free, rallied his team, kept the fight alive. He thought he'd turned Ray's game again, but the councilman wasn't playing checkers. He was torching the board, and the flames were already licking closer than Marcus could dream. Marcus Tate slumped in the backseat of Greg's car, the leather cool against his sweat-damp t-shirt as they pulled away from the police station. Detroit's midnight skyline a blur of sodium lights and shadowed towers. His ribs pulsed under. The tape, a dull ache from the ambush 3 days ago, now layered with the sting of cuffs from a rigged arrest he'd just slipped. Lena's voice crackled from the front, fierce and steady. Plotting headlines, CEO framed, fights back, while Greg, his weary lawyer, gripped the wheel, muttering about suing the precinct for planting 10 ounces of coke in Marcus's office. The bailout had been a rush. Greg's evidence poking holes in the setup, a judge's favor cutting him loose, and Marcus felt the tide turning again. He'd walked into Tate Motors undercover, a ghost in faded clothes, and faced sneers, fists, a smear campaign, and now a crooked bust, all orchestrated by Ray Carter, that flannel-clad councilman with a vendetta. But he'd fought through, kept his empire's name alive, and now his team was swinging back. He rubbed his wrists, red from the cuffs, and let a grim smile crack his split lip. Ray thought he'd caged him, but Marcus was free, ready to bury the bastard in court. The car hummed along Woodward Avenue, the lot's floodlights glinting a mile off, when a sharp glow flickered on the horizon. Orange. Wild. Wrong. Greg squinted, slowing the sedan. What's that? Lena twisted, her phone dropping mid-text, and Marcus bolted upright, ribs forgotten, heart slamming into his throat. That's my dealership, he rasped, voice tight, and Greg floored it, tires squealing as they raced closer. Tate Motors loomed ahead, but it wasn't the sleek glass box he'd left. It was a furnace. Flames roaring through shattered windows, licking up the walls, devouring the roof. Sirens wailed in the distance, red and blue strobing the night, as fire trucks screeched into the lot, hoses blasting arcs of water that hissed against the inferno. Marcus flung the door open before Greg stopped, stumbling out, the heat slamming his face like a wall. Smoke choked the air, thick with the stench of burning rubber and melting steel, and he staggered forward, sneakers crunching glass as firefighters shouted, "Stay back." The showroom was gone, cars twisted into blackened husks, the pickup. He'd bought a smoldering shell, the counter where he'd faced Kyle Ash. His empire, 20 years of sweat and soul, crumbled before his eyes, flames swallowing every brick he'd laid. Greg grabbed his arm, pulling him back, but Marcus shook free, roaring, "This is Ray." He did this, his voice cracked, drowned by the fire's roar, as Lena dialed frantically, yelling for cops, press anyone. Firefighters found gas cans near the wreckage, their gloved hands lifting one with a smudged print, Marcus's print, lifted from the truck he'd bought, planted, here to pin it on him. A cop, not Buzz Cut but a weary rookie, cuffed him again, barking, "Arson Tate. You're back in the box." Marcus twisted, ribs screaming, shouting, "It's a setup, you idiots. Check the cans, check the lot." But the rookie shoved him toward a cruiser, the crowd, neighbors, late-night gawkers chanting, "Lock him up." Burned his own place. Marcus's head spun, the flames reflecting in his eyes as they hauled him in. The door slamming shut. Ray had torched his world, framed him again, and the city was buying it. hook and line. The cell was colder this time, the station's gray walls pressing in as Marcus paced. Sneakers scuffing concrete, his mind a storm of rage and plans. Lena and Greg burst in at dawn. Greg slamming files on the guard's desk. Printer planted cans. Match nothing he touched here. We've got a witness, too. Marcus gripped the bars, hope flickering. Who? Lena leaned in, voice low. Clara. She saw a van peel out in our before the fire. 3 guys, not you. She's scared but talking. Greg nodded, flipping pages. Judge'll toss this arsons to Sloppy. Timing's off. You're out soon. Marcus exhaled, ribs easing a fraction. Clara. His rock from day one. Had his back, and Greg's. Lawyering was shredding Ray's frame. The guard unlocked the cell by noon, grumbling, bail again. Tate and Marcus stepped free, Clara waiting outside, her apron swapped for a sweater. Eyes red but fierce. I saw him, Mr. Tate hoods, gas cans, speeding off. Told the cops everything. He hugged her, gentle despite the pain, whispering, "You're gold, Clara." Lena clapped his shoulder, grinning. Presses flipping, CEO targeted now. We've got Ray's scent. Marcus nodded, a spark reigniting. He'd broken free again, turned the arson rap into a lifeline with Clara's eyes and Greg's brains. The fire had gutted his dealership, sure, but he'd rebuild, he always did, and Ray's sloppy hit was cracking open. He limped to Greg's car, the lot's ashes smoldering in his mind, thinking he'd flip the script once more. Ray was slipping, his prints on this mess, and Marcus had proof, a witness, a story, a shot to bury him. He sank into the seat, ribs throbbing, believing. He'd dodged the worst. The Empire was wounded, but he'd held it, kept the fight alive, right? Wrong. Ray wasn't in the warehouse now. He sat in a dingy motel off 8 Mile, blinds drawn. A burner phone pressed to his ear as Tito, the gang leader, growled updates. Fire's done, but he's out, some old lady snitched. Ray's thick fingers crushed a beer can, tobacco staining his growl. Then grab her, that witness, she's gone. Kidnap her, make it quiet, and tell Tate if he talks, she's dead. Tito chuckled, gold chains clanking. On it, boss, she's toast. Ray hung up, spitting into a cup, eyes glinting cold. Marcus thought he'd won with a witness, but Ray wasn't playing defense, he was cutting throats. And Clara was next. Back in Greg's car, Marcus watched Detroit roll by. The skyline jagged against a gray dawn, his mind on rebuilding, suing, fighting. He didn't see the van trailing to blocks back. Didn't hear Tito's crew plotting over static. The fire had been a blow, but Clara's word and Greg's law had pulled him out, turned Ray's arson into a misstep. He thought he'd gained ground, but Ray's next move was already rolling, and it'd strike harder than flames or cuffs. Hey, comment number 1 if you think Marcus should have seen this fire coming after Ray's last hit, or number 2 if you'd bet on him rebuilding stronger than ever. Smash that like button if you're gutted his empire's ash now, and subscribe to see how he claws back. Ever had a wind turn to smoke like that? Drop it below. So what happens when Marcus's lifeline? Clara vanishes into Ray's grip. Marcus Tate gripped the armrest of Greg's car. The city's gray dawn smearing past the windows as Detroit's jagged skyline loomed beyond the ashes of Tate Motors. His ribs throbbed under the tape, a dull roar from the ambush, rest, and now the fire that had gutted his dealership hours ago. Greg's voice droned from the driver's seat, plotting lawsuits against Ray Carter, while Lena tapped her phone. Spinning CEO targeted into gold. Clara's witness account, 3 hooded figures with gas cans fleeing the lot, had sprung him from a second frame up, and Marcus felt the ground steadying. He'd walked in undercover for days back, a ghost in a faded t-shirt testing his empire, and faced sneers, fists, smears, cuffs, and flames, all Ray's doing. That flannel-clad councilman with a vendetta. But he'd slipped every trap, kept his name alive, and now Clara's word was a lifeline. He rubbed his swollen lip, the split crusting over, and exhaled slow. Ray was slipping, his arson sloppy, and Marcus had a shot to bury him. Greg turned onto a quiet stretch off Jefferson Avenue, the car humming past shuttered storefronts. When Marcus's phone buzzed, Clara's number, a text, "They're here, help." His gut iced over, breath catching as he barked, turn around. Now, Greg swerved, tires squealing. And Marcus dialed Clara, the line ringing dead. Ray's got her, he rasped, voice tight, picturing her red eyes, her fierce hug outside. The station, Greg floored it back toward her duplex 5 miles off. Lena's fingers flying to call 911, but Marcus knew cops were Ray's puppets, too slow, too late. The car screeched into Clara's street, a working-class row of peeling paint and chain-link fences, and Marcus spotted it, a black van idling curbside. To figures in hoods hauling a thrashing bundle into the back. Clara. He flung the door open, leaping out as Greg braked, ribs screaming, and charged, sneakers pounding asphalt. Let her go, he roared, voice raw. But the van's engine revved, doors slamming as it peeled out. Tires smoking. Marcus sprinted, lungs burning, and grabbed a brick from a crumbling stoop, hurling it at the rear window. Glass shattered, a shard nicking his hand, blood dripping, but the van didn't stop, vanishing around a corner. He stumbled, chest heaving, as Greg and Lena caught up. Her phone still pressed to her ear. Cops are 10 minutes out, she said. Voice shaky, Marcus spat blood, eyes wild. Too late. Ray's killers, they'll dump her if I don't move. He didn't wait, didn't think survival mode kicked in. The same grit that had carried him through Detroit's East Side scraps. He bolted for the pickup he'd parked nearby after the bailout, keys shaky in his bloodied hand, and cranked the engine, the rumble a war cry. Greg shouted, Marcus, wait. But he was gone, tires screeching as he tore after the van. Weaving through backstreets, the city a blur of brick and neon. He spotted it 3 blocks off, weaving through traffic, and gunned it, cutting off. A sedan that honked wild. The van swerved, clipping a hydrant, water gushing, and Marcus closed in, adrenaline drowning the pain in his ribs. He didn't see the second crew 3 of Ray's hired killers peeling out from an alley. In a rusted Chevy, eyes locked on his truck. They'd tailed him from the station, Tito's boys. Gold chains glinting as they sped up, boxing him in. The lead thug, a hulking brute with a shaved head, leaned out, a pistol flashing in the streetlights. Shots cracked, bullets pinging the truck's fender, and Marcus ducked, glass spraying as the side window blew out. He swerved hard, clipping a dumpster, metal screeching, and floored it down a narrow cut-through, the Chevy roaring behind. His mind raced. Clara in that van, killers on his tail, Ray pulling strings. He'd lost the van's trail, but these punks were here, and he'd damn well survive them. The alley twisted, brick walls blurring, and he slammed the brakes, spinning the truck to block the path. The Chevy skidded, crashing into a trash pile, and Marcus leapt out, ribs howling, snatching a rusted pipe from the ground. The brute charged, pistol raised, but Marcus swung, cracking his wrist, the gun clattering. Away. The second thug, weary with a scar, lunged with a knife, slicing Marcus's arm, blood welling. But he dodged, smashing the pipe into the guy's knee, dropping him with a howl. The third, a twitchy kid, hesitated, then bolted, leaving his crew. Groaning, Marcus panted, blood dripping from his arm, pipe trembling in his grip, and stumbled to the Chevy, kicking the door open. A phone buzzed on the seat. Clara's, snatched from her, screen glowing with a call from Tito. He grabbed it, hitting play on a voicemail. Ray's growl burned his place. Now grab the old lady. Tell Tate she's dead if he talks. Marcus's blood ran cold, then hot, fury surging. He'd lost Clara's trail, but this was gold. He dialed Lena, voice ragged. Got Ray on tape, ordering the fire, the kidnapping. Get this too. Channel 7 now, she gasped. Where are you? But he hung up, peeling out in the truck, the Chevy's wreckage fading behind. The story hit airwaves fast. Councilman linked to arson. Lena's spin turning Ray's voice into a noose. Marcus raced toward downtown, ribs pulsing, thinking he'd flipped it again. The tape was out. Ray's allies would waver, and he'd find Clara with this leverage. He pulled into a gas station, cutting the engine, blood soaking his sleeve as he replayed the voicemail, grinning grim despite the pain. He'd outsmarted the killers, turned their screw-up into a weapon, and Detroit was waking up. Ray's empire was cracking. Council buddies bailing, cops sniffing, and Marcus had the proof to bury him. He'd survived the chase, kept the fight. Alive, right? Wrong. Ray wasn't in that motel now. He sat in a shadowed garage off Gracio Avenue. Tito pacing, gold chains clanking as he snarled into a burner. He got the phone, boss. Old lady's still ours, but he's loose. Ray's thick fingers snapped a pencil, tobacco staining his snarl. Then frame him bigger. Dump her body, make it look like he killed her. Plant his knife, stage it tight. Tito nodded, grinning wide. She's history, and he's toast. Ray stood, spitting on the oil-stained floor, eyes glinting cold. Do it now. He'll choke on this. Back at the gas station, Marcus leaned on the truck, the pump's neon flickering as he wiped blood from his arm, replaying Ray's voice. Plotting next steps. He didn't see the van rolling silent 10 miles off, didn't hear Tito's crew laughing as they staged Clara's murder. A knife from his office lifted during the drug plant gleaming in their hands. The chase had been a win, the tape a knockout, and he thought he'd turned Ray's game again. Sirens wailed faint in the distance, closing in. But he didn't clock the trap tightening. Ray wasn't just fighting back. He was rewriting the board, and Marcus was about to bleed for it. Marcus Tate sat rigid in the defendant's chair, the courtroom's oak walls pressing in as Detroit's midday sun sliced through high windows, glinting off the judge's gavel. His navy suit hung loose over taped ribs, the ache a dull throb beneath the adrenaline pumping through his veins. 5 days ago, he'd walked into Tate Motors Undercover, a ghost in a faded t-shirt testing his empire. And now he faced a murder rap. Clara's body dumped in an alley, his office knife planted beside her, Ray Carter's latest frame-up. After the ambush, smear, arrest, and fire, the gas station's neon still flickered in his mind, where he'd sent Ray's taped orders: arson, kidnapping to Channel 7, turning the city against the councilman. Sirens had screamed him back to cuffs, but Greg, his weary lawyer, had worked fast, proving Clara wasn't dead, just missing, and the knife's prints were too clean, too staged. Now, in this packed room, reporters scribbling, jurors shifting, Lena in the gallery gripping her phone. Marcus stared down the fight of his life. The prosecutor, a slick guy with a buzz cut and a tight, paced, waving the knife in evidence. Marcus Tate stabbed his own cashier, staged it to dodge. Justice arson, drugs, now murder. He barked, voice booming. Marcus's jaw clenched, ribs pulsing, as Greg stood, sharp eyes glinting. Objection, speculation, the evidence is planted, timeline's a mess. He flipped files, slamming proof on the table. Security gaps during the drug plant, Clara's van sighting, Ray's voicemail crackling over speakers, burned his place. Now grab the old lady. The jury leaned in, whispers rippling, and Marcus felt the tide nudge his way. Greg paced, tearing into the frame-up, knives from his office, sure, but no blood, no struggle prints lifted. Not pressed, cops tied to Councilman Carter botched. This, and Tate's the victim, the prosecutor sputtered, but the judge, a gray-haired woman with a no-nonsense stare, nodded slow. Ours bled by witnesses stumbling. Ray's cop pal sweating on the stand, and at dusk, the jury filed out. Marcus's pulse hammering his ribs. They returned fast, foreman standing. Not guilty. Cheers erupted, Lena clapping. Reporters scrambling, and Marcus exhaled, ribs easing as Greg grinned. Told you, boss, sloppy work. The judge banged her gavel. Cuffs stayed off, and Marcus walked free, suit wrinkled, but head high, thinking he'd beaten Ray at last. The courtroom emptied, Ray storming out, flannel flapping, his sunburned face a mask of fury as he shoved past cameras. Marcus lingered, shaking Greg's hand, Clara's absence a weight on his chest. She's still out there, he muttered, and Lena nodded, fierce. We'll find her. Ray's cracking. He stepped into the hall, air thick with victory, believing he'd turned the tide. Arson exposed, murder rap dead, Empire's name clawing back. He'd outsmarted Ray's law, kept the fight alive. Right? Wrong. His phone buzzed as he hit the courthouse steps, an unknown number texting a photo. Jade, his 16-year-old niece, gagged, tied to a chair, eyes wide with terror. A message followed. Testify again. She's dead. Marcus's gut iced, legs buckling as he gripped the rail, ribs forgotten. Jade, his sister's kid, all braces and bravado, living with him since the fire gutted their world. Ray had her, a dagger to his throat after the courtroom win. He dialed Lena, voice shaking. "Jade's gone, Ray's got her. I'm going after her." She gasped, "Marcus, wait." But he hung up, racing to the pickup parked blocks off, engine roaring as he tore toward the east side. Mind spinning. Ray wasn't in court now. He'd bolted to a rusted warehouse off Gratiot, where Tito's crew held Jade, her sneakers scuffing concrete as she thrashed against ropes. Marcus knew the area old haunts from his scrap metal days and gunned it, weaving through traffic, dusk bleeding into night. He spotted the warehouse, a hulking shadow with a flickering bulb, and ditched the truck a block off, sneaking through weeds, ribs screaming with every step. Voices leaked out Tito's growl, "Boss says waste her if he talks," and a thug's laugh. Marcus crept to a broken window, peering in, Jade in the center, 3 goons circling, gold chains glinting. He grabbed a steel rod from the dirt, heart pounding, and slipped through a side door, shadow to shadow. The first thug, a squat guy with a buzz cut, turned to late. Marcus swung, cracking his skull, dropping him silent. The second, weary with a scar, lunged, knife flashing, but Marcus dodged, slamming the rod into his gut. Then his jaw, bones crunching as he fell. Tito whirled, pistol raised, snarling, "You're dead, Tate." But Marcus charged, rod meeting wrist, gun skittering across concrete. He tackled Tito, fists flying, blood sprayed. Teeth cracked, hand pinned him, knee on his chest, rod at his throat. "Where's Ray?" he roared, voice raw. Tito choked, "Gone, left her for us." Marcus knocked him cold, ribs howling, and cut Jade free, her sobs muffled as he yanked the gag off. "Uncle Marcus," she gasped, clinging tight, and he hugged her, blood dripping from his knuckles. "You're safe, kid, I've got you." They stumbled out, her arm over his shoulder, the warehouse silent behind them, and he drove her to Greg's office, Lena waiting, gasping as they burst in. "Ray's done, she's proof," Lena said, dialing cops, and Marcus sank into a chair, Jade trembling beside him. He'd one courtroom cleared, Jade saved, Ray's crew smashed. The fight was his again, right? Wrong. Ray wasn't in that warehouse now. He sat in a dive bar off 8 Mile, flannel sleeves rolled, tobacco staining his growl as he watched a TV loop Marcus's acquittal. His phone buzzed. Tito's crew down, Jade gone, and he smashed a glass, eyes glinting cold. He texted from a burner, a live stream link, Jade tied again, a gun to her temple, no timestamp, no clue if it was old or new. "Surrender your company, or she dies," the message read, sent to Marcus's number. Ray leaned back, spitting on the floor, a smirk curling. "Checkmate, punk." Back at Greg's, Marcus patched his knuckles, Jade sipping water, her eyes hollow but safe. He thought he'd flipped Ray's game. Trial 1, niece free, Empire clinging on. The phone buzzed, screen glowing with the stream, and his blood froze, ribs still as death. Ray wasn't broken, he was reloading, and Jade's life hung on Marcus's next move, the clock ticking louder than ever. Marcus Tate sat on the edge of a leather couch in Greg's downtown office, the city's night pressing against the windows as Detroit's neon pulse flickered beyond the glass. His navy suit was rumpled, ribs throbbing under the tape from a week of hell: ambush, smear, arrest, fire, trial, and Jade's rescue hours ago. The 16-year-old huddled beside him, her sneakers scuffing the rug, eyes hollow after Ray Carter's goons had tied her up, a gun to her head until Marcus smashed them down with a steel rod. In that warehouse, Greg paced, phone to his ear, plotting lawsuits while Lena tapped furiously, spinning CEO Clear's name, saves Neeson to gold. Marcus had walked into Tate Motors 6 days back, a ghost in a faded t-shirt testing his empire, and faced Ray's relentless war sneers, fists, frames, flames, and now kidnapping. The courtroom acquittal and Jade's freedom felt like a knockout. Ray's murder rap crumbling under Greg's evidence and Clara's missing but alive status. Marcus rubbed his swollen knuckles, blood crusted from the fight, and let a faint grin crack his split lip. Ray was cracking, counsel allies bailing, cops sniffing his trail, and Marcus had flipped the bastard's game again. He squeezed Jade's shoulder, her trembling easing, thinking he'd held the line, kept his family and empire alive. The phone buzzed on the coffee table, the live stream link glowing. Jade tied, gagged, a gun at her temple and his gut iced. Over, grin vanishing. What the hell, he rasped, snatching it, the image frozen, no timestamp. Ray's text glaring, surrender your company, or she dies, Jade gasped, clutching his arm. That's me but I'm here, Marcus's. Mind raced old footage, a bluff, but the threat sank claws deep. Ray wasn't done. He was twisting the knife. Then a knock rattled the door, sharp and urgent, and Derek burst in. Marcus's coup since the early days, all slick hair and a tailored vest, his face pale as ash. Marcus, we need to talk, he said, voice shaky, eyes darting to Jade, Lena. Greg, Marcus stood, ribs twinging, suspicion prickling. Now what's this? Derek swallowed hard, hands flexing, and dropped the bomb. It's me, I screwed you. Ray got to me months ago, blackmail, my kid's college fund. I planted the drugs, tipped the gang for the fire. I'm sorry, man. The room stopped. Greg's phone slipped. Lena's fingers froze. Jade's breath hitched. Marcus's blood roared, ribs forgotten as he lunged, grabbing Derek's vest, slamming him against a wall with a thud. You what? He roared, voice raw, knuckles whitening. My office, my dealership, Clara. Jade, you sold me out. Derek's head lolled, eyes wet, stammering. He had photos me with a girl. Not my wife, he'd ruined me. I didn't know it'd go this far. Marcus's fist cocked, trembling, rage blinding him. Derek, his brother in arms, the guy who'd crunched numbers in a basement office when Tate Motors was a dream. Now a snake in his gut. Lena grabbed his arm, pulling back. Marcus, stop, he's confessing. We can use this. Greg nodded, sharp eyes glinting. He's a witness now. Ray is cooked. Marcus shoved Derek off, chest heaving, and stepped back, ribs screaming as he glared. You're dead to me. Talk, or I'll break you myself. Derek sank to the floor, hands shaking, spilling. It's Ray's calls, drop spots, threats piling since Marcus's undercover stunt triggered the war. He wanted you gone, CEO or not. He hated you. Rising, Derek choked, wiping snot. Marcus turned away, disgust choking him, the betrayal, blade deeper than Ray's fists or flames. His inner circle, the steel he'd leaned on, had rusted through, and Jade's wide eyes burned the wound wider. He paced, mind spinning, drugs in his drawer, the fire's timing. All Derek's hands and Ray's livestream now a taunt from a man who'd played his own team against him. But he wasn't breaking, not yet. He faced Lena, voice low, steel hard. Get the staff. Loyal ones. Clara's out there. Jade's here, but Ray's still swinging. We rebuild, fight back. Lena nodded, dialing, and Greg scribbled Derek's words, building a case. Marcus grabbed his phone, calling Paul at the burned-out dealership. Round up who's left. Meeting. Now, we're not done. Paul stammered, yes, sir, and within an hour, 15 staff piled into Greg's office. Salesmen, mechanics, Clara's cashier pals, all wide-eyed but fierce, the fire's ash still on their shoes. Marcus stood, ribs pulsing, Jade beside him, and laid it out. Derek sold us out. Drugs, fire, all Ray's orders. He's fired, but we're not. Tate Motors is me, you, this city we don't fold. Paul nodded. Kyle shifted, guilt in his eyes from day one, and a mechanic, burly with grease-stained hands, growled, we're with you, boss. Marcus felt the spark reignite. A crew forged in the wreckage and rallied them. Insurance claims, temp lots, Ray's us in a sling. We've got his voice, Derek's confession, we'll bury him, he said, voice rising, and they cheered, fists pumping, Jade's small grin breaking through her fear. He'd flipped it, betrayal exposed. Team tightened, empire clinging. On Ray's livestream was a bluff. Jade safe beside him, and Marcus thought he'd purged the poison. Turned the tide again. He sank back, ribs easing, believing he'd wrestled control from the chaos. Right? Wrong. Ray wasn't in that bar now. He sat in a shadowed attic off Cass Avenue, flannel sleeves rolled, tobacco staining his growl as he watched the live stream. Loop on a laptop. Jade tied, gun gleaming, a pre-recorded flex he'd sent to break Marcus. His burner buzzed, Tito's voice crackling. He's got her back. Cruise down, Derek's singing. Ray's thick fingers snapped a pencil, eyes glinting cold as he dialed a new number. Broadcasting live this time, no bluff, no old tape. The screen flickered, Jade tied again, real time. A gun pressed to her temple by a masked thug. Her muffled sobs cutting the air. Ray's voice growled through, "Surrender Tate Motors, Tate, or she's dead 5 minutes." He sent the link, lived him Marcus's phone, and leaned back, spitting on the floor, a smirk curling. "Your move, punk." Back at Greg's, Marcus rallied his crew, their cheers still echoing as his phone buzzed, the screen glowing with the live feed. Jade, not safe, not beside him, snatched again in the chaos of Derek's confession. His blood froze, ribs still as death, the room spinning as Lena gasped, "How?" Greg lunged for the phone, "It's real time, trace it." But Marcus stared, Jade's eyes pleading, the clock ticking down. He'd fired Derek, rallied his loyalists, thought he'd flipped Ray's game, arson, drugs, murder, kidnapping, all. Countered, Empire clinging on. But Ray had struck deeper, snatching Jade from under his nose, turning victory to ash again, and Marcus's next move would cost everything. The gun's barrel glinting louder than words. Marcus Tate stood frozen in Greg's office, the live stream glowing on his phone screen like a death sentence. Jade, his 16-year-old niece, tied to a chair, a masked thug pressing a gun to her temple, her muffled sobs slicing through the static. Ray Carter's growl crackled over the feed, "Surrender Tate Motors, or she's dead 5 minutes." And the timer ticked down, red digits glaring, for minutes, 50 seconds. The room spun. Lena's gasp, Greg's shout to trace it, the staff's stunned silence, but Marcus's blood roared, ribs throbbing under the tape as he snatched the phone, the image searing his eyes. 7 days ago, he'd walked into Tate Motors Undercover, a ghost in a faded t-shirt testing his empire, and faced Ray's war sneers, fists, smears, cuffs, fire, betrayal, and now this. Jade snatched again after Derek's confession cracked. His inner circle. He'd rallied his loyalist Spall, Kyle, mechanics thought he'd flipped Ray's game. But the councilman had turned victory to ash, striking at his family with a live or die ultimatum. Marcus bolted for the door, navy suit flapping, barking, "Greg, call Clara, she'll tip the cops." Greg lunged for his phone, on it, while Lena grabbed Marcus's arm. "You can't go alone." He shook her off, ribs screaming, voice raw, "She's my kid, I'm ending this." He tore out, sneakers pounding the hall, and leapt into the blue pickup, engine roaring as he peeled into Detroit's night, the city's neon a blur. The stream looped Jade's terror, no location, but Marcus knew Ray arrogant, close, somewhere. He'd gloat. Cass Avenue, that attic vibe from Derek's spill. Click, he gunned it north, weaving through traffic, tires screeching past honking cabs. The timer hit 3 minutes, 30 seconds, and his knuckles whitened on the wheel. Blood crusted from the warehouse brawl, mind racing. Ray's flannel, his tobacco spit, his smug face waving from the arrest. This ended now. He screeched to a stop off Cass, a shadowed row of brick hulks, and spotted it, an attic light flickering in a boarded up relic. A black SUV parked crooked out front, Ray's ride. Marcus ditched the truck, snatching a tire iron from the bed, and crept through. Weeds, ribs pulsing with every step, the timer at 2 minutes flat. Voices leaked out, a thug's grunt, Ray's growl, and Marcus kicked the side door. Wood splintering as he stormed in, tire iron raised. The attic stank of sweat and oil. Jade in the center, ropes biting her wrists, the masked thug a hulking brute with a buzz cut spinning, gun flashing. "You're late, Tate," he snarled, but Marcus charged, swinging the iron, cracking the guy's elbow. The pistol clattering to the floorboards, Ray lunged from a corner, flannel sleeves rolled, thick fists swinging, roaring, "You're done, punk." Marcus ducked, ribs howling, and slammed the iron into Ray's gut, doubling him over with a wheeze. 2 more goons burst from a stairwell, knives gleaming, one weary, one stocky, but Marcus was a storm. Fueled by Jade's sobs, he smashed the weary one's knee, bones crunching, and tackled the stocky thug, iron meeting jaw, blood spraying. As he dropped, Ray staggered up, spitting tobacco, and swung a chair. Wood splintering across Marcus's shoulder, pain exploding white hot. Marcus roared, lunging, and drove the iron into Ray's ribs, cracking bone, pinning him to the wall. Face inches from his. "Where's Clara?" he bellowed, voice raw, timer at 30 seconds. Ray choked, smirking despite the blood, Gone your empire's mine. Marcus slammed his fist into Ray's nose, cartilage snapping, and Ray slumped, out cold, the timer hitting 10 as sirens wailed close Clara's tip. Cops rolling in. Marcus cut Jade free, her arms clinging tight. "Uncle Marcus," she sobbed, and he hauled her out. Tire iron clattering, ribs of firestorm as blue lights flooded the street. Cops swarmed Buzz Cut's crew, but straight this time cuffing. Ray and his goons, medics rushing Jade, Marcus leaning on the truck, blood dripping from his split lip. Greg and Lena screeched up, Clara in tow, her sweater torn but alive. Freed from a basement stash Ray's crew had dumped her in. "Mr. Tate, you did it," she cried, hugging him gentle, and Marcus grinned, ribs easing, Jade safe beside him. Detroit woke fast. Channel 7 blared, CEO storms hideout, saves niece, councilman caught. Ray's taped orders and Derek's confession sealing his fate. Crowds cheered outside the burned dealership next dawn, signs waving Tate stays. As Marcus stood, suit swapped for a hoodie, ribs taped fresh, Jade at his side. The staff rallied Paul, Kyle, mechanics insurance cash flowing, a temp lot buzzing. And Lena spun at gold, Marcus Tate, hero of Detroit. Ray faced trial, allies bailing. His smirk gone behind bars. Snarling, "You lost more than you think." A cryptic jab Marcus brushed off. He'd won empire intact, family whole, Ray crushed. He drove Jade home in the pickup, her silence heavy but safe, and parked at his Bloomfield Hills condo, the skyline glinting gold. "We're good now, kid," he said, squeezing her hand. Thinking he'd turned Ray's war into a legacy. Kept Tate Motors alive, right? Wrong. Jade pulled away, eyes red, voice small but firm. "I can't stay, Uncle Marcus. I'm leaving. Got a job with Apex Autos, rivals downstate. It's too much." His gut dropped, ribs still as stone. Her words a punch deeper than Ray's fists. "Jade, what? You're safe, I fixed it." She shook her head, braces glinting as she bit her lip. "You fought." "Yeah, but I was tied up, guns on me twice. I can't live this. Apex offered me clerk work, quiet, away from this mess." Marcus's hands flexed, voice cracking. "You're my family, don't do this." She hugged him, tears soaking his hoodie. "I love you, but I need out. You're strong, I'm not." She grabbed a packed bag stashed during the chaos and walked to a waiting car, Apex's logo on the side, pulling away as Marcus stood, rooted. The engine's hum fading into the night. He sank onto the curb, ribs pulsing. The victory hollowed out. Empire saved, Ray jailed. But Jade gone, the cost no headline could spin. Ray's cell echoed with a dry chuckle miles off. "Lost more than you think," ringing true now. A taunt from a beaten man who'd still cut deep. Marcus climbed into the truck, the wheel cold under his palms, and drove. Detroit's lights blurring past, vowing to fix what racism broke Clara back, staff loyal. But Jade's absence a scar no fight could heal. "Hey, Marcus here, just me. Now, rolling through the city I bled for. Built Tate Motors from nothing, faced a war to keep it. And won, kinda. Ray's locked up, my name's clear. But family? That's the twist I didn't see. Guess you don't dodge every punch. I'll rebuild, always do new lots. New rules, fairness first. But Jade's out there, chasing quiet I couldn't give her. That's the real fight now, mending what's left. Catch you on the road." Marcus Tate's journey in Undercover. CEO buys a car at his own dealership. Stops cold when he hears to customers behind him. Is a raw testament to resilience against systemic prejudice. The first lesson hits hard. Racism isn't just words, it's a force that escalates from sneers to violence, framing, and betrayal when challenged. Marcus faced it head-on, undercover in his own empire, exposing cracks he'd never have seen from the top. His fight teaches us that ignorance of injustice doesn't erase it, only confronting it head-first reveals the truth. Second, power doesn't shield you. Marcus's CEO status made him a target, not a savior, showing how deeply bias roots itself, even in places built on fairness. His wins, courtroom victories, Jade's rescues came through grit and allies, like Clara, proving community and cunning can outmatch corruption. Yet, the third lesson stings. Victory carries costs. Jade's exit, fleeing the chaos Marcus battled, underscores that fighting racism can fracture personal bonds, leaving scars. No triumph heals. Finally, persistence pays Ray's downfall came from Marcus's refusal to fold, a reminder that justice demands relentless pushback, even when the system bends against you. This story isn't just a thrill ride, it's a mirror to society's flaws and a call to action. We can't sit silent whether it's calling out bias or rebuilding what's broken. Every step counts. So, what's your take? Comment below. Have you faced a fight like Marcus's? Or lost something big to win? Hit like if this stirred you. Subscribe for more real deal tales. And share to spark the convo. Thanks for riding this roller coaster. With me, here's to chasing justice and keeping it real, wherever you're at.